consider who's at the cross. The faithful few, the criminals, those who will follow from afar, and yes, passersby and bystanders. Think about who's at the cross. People of all ethnicities. We know there's a man there named Simon of Cyrene from North Africa. We know there are those who are Roman soldiers who have a different ethnicity, maybe from all over the empire. We know there are those from different classes of society, those Roman soldiers, those nuts and bolts of the Roman Empire, those who've been hired by Rome to help with such executions, they're there. A disciple that's followed close by, some women who followed Jesus, women of all different kinds of wealth, some poor, some working class, some very wealthy who've been supporting Jesus. They're all there. Criminals who will be executed with him, and wealthy and religious leaders who have great influence. They're all there at the cross. And we're there too. The great painter Rembrandt used to paint himself into all of his paintings, and in his painting, The Raising of the Cross, he paints himself there, helping to raise the cross of Jesus. He's dressed in a Renaissance suit, but he's there, raising the cross of Jesus, reminding us that in some ways we are all there, all invited to step into the story of Jesus. There were those there that day that were simply there as bystanders, those who were passing by. Some were there and they were passing by and they missed what was happening when God was changing the world simply because they were too busy. In Mark's succinct account, the Roman soldiers, we're told, brought him to this place of crucifixion. And after they hung him on the cross, they knelt down and they began to cast lots to take the last few items that Jesus ever even possessed in this world, divided up among themselves, took the time to climb up next to the cross and put a sign, King of the Jews, a sign of mockery. The soldiers remind us of those who were just too busy to notice what was happening. They missed the significance of the moment because it's just the routine of life, focusing on what is right in front of them. It's business as usual in Jerusalem. We don't know how many people were crucified by the Roman Empire. Some say 300,000. Other historians say well over 1 million. We don't know how many were put to death outside Jerusalem. We just know this was routine. They knew what to do, they knew how to do it, and they were going about their business. And these soldiers, these bystanders there, they just remind us that sometimes we miss what God is doing, just so busy with what we have to do. And even as we enter this Lenten season, we consider the cross. I want to encourage you not to be too busy to miss its significance this year. Too busy with our families, too busy with our jobs, too busy with all the demands of life. Let's just not miss what God is doing. I'm reminded of the great parable of where Jesus invites the guests to the great banquet hall. The master's going to invite people to come in and rejoice with him. You remember the excuses that were given. One said, I've just bought a field, I got to go look at it. Another says, I bought a team of oxen, I got to go try them out. Another man just said, I got married, I can't come. Just life. They missed what the master had because of just life. And sometimes, like the bystanders there at the cross, we're just too busy doing what we do. Even sometimes too busy doing the church stuff that we missed. The cross and its significance. There's some there that day, we're told, who are passing by, and the truth is they're just kind of apathetic. There is an indication that there are those who are just passing by while the whole event is occurring. If you ever go to Jerusalem and go on some of the guided tours, they take you to a couple of places where they believe that the cross could have been. The first is in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and there in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, there are 3 places you would want to see. There's the place where they believe the cross was located. There in this place is a a rock that is split in two, that they say this is where the rock was split in two when Jesus died. It's a few steps away, really, from where they believe the cave was where Jesus was buried. But so they believe the cross and that location is inside that church now. You walk a few steps and there's a marble slab on the floor. They say this is where Jesus was laid and his body was taken care of before he went to the grave. And then just still a few yards away is the cave they believe was the tomb. And if you go to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, you can see all three of those sites. But there's another site outside the city walls that others think was the place of crucifixion. It is a place that's outside amongst the busy streets of the city. But if you sit there and look upon the cliff right outside where the guided place is now found, you can see the mountain and you can see the outcropping of the rocks, and it looks like a skull. It looks like it is described here in Scripture, the place of the skull. And so many believe that that is where the crucifixion occurs. And I've always liked that second place the best, because it's an interesting experience. As you're sitting there trying to listen to the guides, there's so much going on. Horns honking and cars moving back and forth on the busy street below. And just on the side where you're sitting, there's a company with trucks moving in and out and cars moving in and out. It's just so busy, it's hard to even listen to what the guide has to say. And I think to myself, that's what it was like. I think that's what it was like. For Rome crucified people on major highways. They crucified them on the way into the city. So that as you walked into the city and saw those hanging on the cross, you knew who was in charge of this city and you knew how to act. And I wonder about those that day who were just walking into Jerusalem, walking out of Jerusalem, walking along that major road and saw these crucifixions occurring and didn't really even take the time to consider what was happening. They just passed by. And if there's a word for that, it's apathy. Just don't care. We've seen all the studies about American religion. We know that the fastest growing group in America as far as religion is concerned are those who would check the box none, no religious affiliation. It's the fastest growing group in America. And what's interesting about the nuns is that they are not in conflict with the church. They're not antagonistic towards Jesus at all. They're not antagonistic even toward us. They just don't even care enough to be antagonistic. It just doesn't matter. It's just apathy. And as we enter into this Lenten season, we can fall into that category. We can miss the cross by our busyness, and we can miss it by our apathy. We can simply say, well, it's just another season. It's another thing we're doing at the church. It's another emphasis we're going to have. We're going to get to Holy Week, Monday, Thursday, Good Friday. Easter's going to come and go. What difference does it really make? We can be cynical. Mark says that those who were passing by hurled insults. But he also says they shook their heads. They shook their heads and they hurled insults. So you were going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days. Come down from the cross, save yourself and save others. The key phrase for me is they shook their heads. Because it's almost this sense of disappointment. Just another Messiah with empty words that it didn't go like he said. Just another disappointment with God. To be sure, the Jewish people had had their disappointments. Even in the day of Jesus, there were at least 3 others claiming to be Messiah. According to Acts, there was Judah the Galilean, there was Thaddeus, and there was also an Egyptian who was going around saying they were the promised Messiah. And their popularity grew, and then it waned, and then they went away. Even after the resurrection, Jesus is with his disciples on the road to Emmaus. They're not looking up and seeing the resurrected Lord. And they say to Jesus, we were hoping he was going to be the one. This disappointment that creates this cynicism. We had hope. You made grand promises, Jesus. It was your day, but look at you now. Come down from the cross, save yourself and others. Little did they understand that the only way to save us was for him to stay on the cross. And so some who passed by that day had become cynical. I mentioned the nuns. A subset of the nuns in our culture are the recently dones. They're the ones who were once a part of a fellowship of believers, once a part of the church, once connected to Christ and his people, but they've been hurt. They've lost faith. They've given up. They're not sure that it really makes any difference. And so they are cynical. You can hear them say, well, save yourself. Show us somehow this makes a difference. And then there are the skeptics. We're told there are chief priests and teachers of the law. They are there too. Maybe they're there to make sure the deed gets done. Maybe they're there to prance around so everybody knows who's really got the power in Jerusalem. It's them. Maybe they're there to mock the one that they have accused of blasphemy. Maybe they're there just to mock him and say, you save others, but you can't save yourself. They are the skeptics. But they're all there. The passersby, the bystanders, the ones that are too busy, apathetic, cynical, and skeptic. And as we enter the Lenten season, we can find ourselves in one of those categories. We can just be too busy to really slow down and think about the cross and take time to reflect. We can be apathetic and think, what difference is it going to really make? We can be cynical in our disappointment. We think God should have acted this way or not acted that way, and we decide that we're not sure we can trust him like we thought we could. Maybe it was just an empty promise. We can be skeptical. I mean, the cross has occurred, resurrection has come, evil is still with us, life is still hard, things have not really gone my way, nothing seems to have changed. It's easy to be skeptical. And if these were the only bystanders that we have in the story, it would be a sad sermon today. But there's one I've not mentioned. Verse 21. A certain man from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way in from the country, and they forced him to carry the cross. They brought Jesus to the place of Golgotha, which means the place of the skull, and there they offered him mixed wine and myrrh, and he did not take it, and they crucified him. There was a man from northern Africa named Simon who had come for the Passover. He had come for the Passover. He's just a bystander, and he had been forced and compelled to enter the story. Can you imagine? Can you imagine making your trip to the Passover, to the holy city? It might be the only time he ever came in his life. We don't know. And he made the great journey to celebrate the Passover, and he's there enjoying the holy city, enjoying his time. And what happens? The Roman soldiers choose him out of the whole crowd. Listen, you're going to now participate in this horrible event. It tells us about the power of the Roman government, that they can take a stranger and put him right in the middle of the crucifixion. There's no resistance. It wouldn't help if there was any. And Simon is chosen to carry the cross. Luke says he picked up the cross behind Jesus and followed him. In a real sense, Simon becomes the first person to ever take up their cross and follow behind Jesus. And it seems that's the end of the story. We don't know what happened after they get to Golgotha. Simon carries the cross for Jesus to the place of crucifixion. Simon disappears from the story. We don't know if he just ran away from that moment. Would you blame him? I would have. What else are they going to ask me to do? We don't know what happened to him. We don't know if he stayed and watched. We just don't know. And his story would have just simply gone away, except Mark tells us something. This was Simon, from Cyrene, the man from North Africa. He's the father of Alexander and Rufus. Why in the world does Mark tell us his sons' names? Well, scholars have tried to figure that out. Because you only mention names that your reader's going to understand and recognize. Why even say their names? Who's Rufus and Alexander? The writer of the Gospel of Mark, John Mark, the companion with Paul and Barnabas on that first missionary trip, we believe got most of his information from the gospel from Peter himself while they were in Rome. We believe that Mark's gospel was written to the church in Rome. And that means that when Mark says Simon is the father of Rufus and Alexander, the church in Rome would have recognized those names. In fact, in Romans 16:13, Paul says, "Greet Rufus, who is chosen in the Lord, and his mother as well. She's been a mother to me." Most scholars believe it's the same person. Rufus shows up again. Some even speculate that Simon was a part of the men of Cyrene that went and preached the gospel, that maybe he might even be Simeon Niger, which means dark complexion, that is mentioned in Antioch. That Simon, the man from North Africa, could have been Simeon in Antioch. We don't really know for sure. But here's what we do know. We do know a bystander by the name of Simon was pulled into the story of the crucifixion. And we do know that his sons are mentioned in the gospel. And we know that one of them is mentioned later. And we know archaeologically that both of them show up in a tomb outside Jerusalem as sons of Simon. And we know Simon was called to come and suffer alongside Jesus. And from all indications, it changed his life. So that 2,000 years later, a bystander who became a follower is being talked about in a Baptist church in Raleigh, North Carolina. Because you see, that's what happens when we move from bystander to follower. When we choose to step into the story ourselves, that's what happens. Our lives take on a whole new meaning. Our lives become lasting. Our lives have a whole new significance when we move from bystander to follower. And so Rembrandt put himself right there at the crucifixion. And we're all there. For Jesus died for all, once and for all. We are all there. And so as we begin this season of Lent, my first question for us is simply this: are we going to be bystanders or followers? Are we willing to step into the story of the cross? Let's pray together. God, forgive us when we pass by and stand by. Forgive us when we have let life cause us to